Daniel thinks that without a god, human life would not have any value.
Hey YouTube, what's going on? So today, I want to talk about a question that I get asked a lot by you guys. And the question is, does life have intrinsic value? And more specifically, does human life have value? And if so, why?
I don't understand what it means to say that something has intrinsic value. For something to have intrinsic value would mean that it has value regardless of whether anyone valued it, which would have no practical meaning. How would you distinguish a thing with inherent value that nobody recognizes from a thing with no value at all? Even if there is a god, value would not be inherent to human life. It would be contingent upon whether that god values that life.
If you're religious, you're probably thinking, well, duh, human life has value. That's a no-brainer, that's a given, that's non-controversial. But if you're atheist or agnostic, then that question is a lot harder to answer. Because if the Big Bang is the only reason that we're here, then aren't we just biological blobs of atoms that happen by chance?
Well, no, not by chance. We exist as a consequence of the order by which matter and energy behave rather than by chance. But even if we did exist by chance, what's the problem with valuing biological blobs of atoms that happen by chance?
Who are we to think that the universe owes us one?
Owes us one? Atheists don't believe that the universe owes us anything. Do you believe that your God owes you something? My understanding was that Christians believe humans to be in debt to a God, not the other way around.
With this worldview, the only value that exists is that which we ascribe to other things. For example, my family is valuable to me. My car is valuable to me. Things are only valuable because we, a random blob of atoms, say that they are.
Even if there's a God, things are only valuable insofar as we say or that God says that they are.
I mean, isn't that a bleak worldview?
The idea that something has inherent value is totally irrelevant if nobody recognizes it. How is that worldview any less bleak? But even if it were bleak, the bleakness of a worldview is irrelevant to its truth.
I think this is why atheists have higher suicide rates than religious people. And that's not a matter of opinion, that's a fact. Atheism has a huge suicide problem compared to people of faith. And in fact, to my knowledge, the only people who have asked me, does human life have value, and if so, why? The only people who have asked me that have been either atheist or agnostic. And honestly, it makes sense that atheists would wrestle with that question. Because without God, what is the meaning of human life in the grand scheme of the cosmos? If we just originated from slime and apes, then how could subjective morality ever tell us that any form of human life is valuable at all?
If you have the subjective experience of valuing human life, then by definition you know that it has subjective value. It still doesn't have inherent value, but the lack of inherent value is not the same thing as not having any value at all.
Why not kill elderly people, the sickly, the mentally disabled?
Because I subjectively value them.
Babies in the womb.
If a baby in the womb is about to be born to a woman who doesn't want to give birth, then I have no problem with aborting it. I'd rather be an aborted fetus than a woman forced to give birth.
If you're like me, all of that sounds ridiculous. Of course human life has value. It's intuitive. It's in our instincts. Evidence of that is the fact that we mourn the lives of both friends and strangers. It makes sense to mourn when someone in your family or someone who is close to you dies, but the reality is that we still know that something important was lost when a stranger, someone who we've never met, has died. That's why we as a nation mourn whenever there are mass shootings and terrorist attacks, even though we may not have personally known the victims.
What does this have to do with whether human life has inherent value? This simply shows that we subjectively value the lives of more people than those with whom we are personally acquainted. Evolution has produced in us a capacity for empathy and compassion for other people. Creationists often argue that this is contrary to the theory of evolution because evolution should only produce empathy for family members because they carry our genes rather than for strangers. This is based on the false assumption that something has to be perfectly advantageous in order for evolution to select it. Sure, our compassion for other people may occasionally cause us to compromise the survival of our own genes in favor of the survival of someone else's, but evolution will still select empathetic people over psychopaths as long as empathy produces a net benefit, even if it doesn't produce an absolute benefit.
To go even further, if we didn't think that human life had value, we'd encourage everyone to commit suicide whenever they have a bad day.
Not if we still subjectively valued life.
All of that to say that if humans didn't have intrinsic value, we wouldn't behave the way that we behave.
We behave the way we behave because we would have gone extinct long ago if we didn't subjectively value life.
We act and live as though we have value because we have value.
Yes, subjective value that we place upon ourselves.
Okay, so I know a lot of people are going to be unconvinced by that, and they are going to think that is a terrible answer. So I have another answer for the question, does human life have value? And I think this answer actually satisfies both theists of any religion as well as atheists and agnostics. For me, human life has value because we have purpose.
But we don't. And if the Christian God exists, Christians tell me that our purpose is to glorify him. What a goofy purpose.
Purpose is why we matter. For Christians, this means that God created us with a purpose. God created us with a will for our lives, his will, and that's why we have value. For atheists, this means that humans have the evolutionary purpose of repopulating the earth and making sure that our species doesn't go extinct.
No, evolution has consequences, not purposes. Survival is a consequence of reproduction and adaptation. It is not the purpose of either. It's also a consequence of our empathy, but it's not the purpose of it. When a consequence is unique to its cause, people often infer that the consequence is the purpose of the cause. But this is a fallacious inference. Purpose implies that the consequence was pre-imagined and willed. Evolution does not imagine or will anything. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.